Last time I told you about the mentor, about the man above the hardware store, about the 3 things he taught me that no book had ever said, that people pay to feel significant, that risk is a calculation, not a personality trait, and that the only time worth investing is time that compounds. He told me at our last meeting, become the right person. The money follows. I was 19 when he said that. I was 22 when I understood, painfully, completely, and all at once, exactly what he meant. Today I'm going to tell you about the worst year of my life. Not because failure is interesting, but because what I learned in that year built the foundation for everything that came after. The people who have studied my career, and there are a few who have tried, always focus on the successes, the businesses, the assets, the returns. They skip the failure. That's a mistake, because the failure is where the real education happened. Let me tell you what I built. Between the ages of 19 and 22, I had been working, not building anything of my own, not yet, but learning, absorbing, saving every penny I could from the administrative work I was doing for Margaret's son and 2 other small businesses I had picked up. By the time I was 21, I had saved what felt, to me at that time, like a significant amount of money. It was not a large sum by any objective measure, but it was everything I had. 3 years of disciplined saving. Every sacrifice I had made since reading that book at 16 had gone into that account. And I decided it was time. The business I chose was important. I had been working adjacent to it for 2 years through Margaret's son. I understood the mechanics. I had relationships with suppliers. I had studied the margins carefully. I found a partner, a man 2 years older than me. Confident, well-connected, persuasive, everything I was not at 21. I invested everything I had saved. 18 months later, it was gone. I want to tell you exactly what happened, not the sanitized version, not the version that makes me look wise in retrospect. The actual version. The business started well. The first 6 months exceeded every projection I had made. We were moving product. The margins were real. I was, for the first time in my life, watching money compound in real time. I remember the feeling. It was not excitement. It was something quieter than that. A deep, calm certainty that I had been right, that the decision I had made at 16, lying in the dark after reading Napoleon Hill, was going to become real. And then 3 things happened in quick succession. The first was the partner. I had chosen him for his confidence and his connections. What I had not properly evaluated was his judgment. His risk tolerance was completely different from mine. While I was thinking in years, he was thinking in weeks. While I was focused on building something sustainable, he was focused on maximizing the next transaction. I did not see this clearly enough, fast enough. The second was a supplier relationship that collapsed without warning. A man we'd been dependent on for 40% of our inventory simply stopped returning calls. We learned later he had made a private arrangement with a competitor. We had no contract, no protection, nothing. The third, and this is the one that still sits with me, was my own blindness. I had seen warning signs, small ones, things that, if I am honest, I had noticed and chosen not to examine too closely because the momentum felt too good to interrupt. The partner making decisions without consulting me. Commitments being made that I only learned about after the fact. Numbers that didn't quite reconcile when I looked carefully. I saw these things. And I told myself stories about them instead of confronting them directly. That is on me. Not on him, not on the supplier. On me. A lesson I have never forgotten and never will. The day it ended was a Thursday in the autumn of 1990. My partner called me in the morning. His voice was different, flat. He said, "We have a problem." By the end of that conversation, I understood that the business was over. The remaining inventory had been committed to a transaction that had fallen through. The account was effectively empty. The supplier we had been waiting on had formalized their arrangement with the competitor. There was nothing left. I sat in my apartment for the rest of that day without moving, not out of despair. I want to be honest about that. It was not despair, it was something more specific. It was the feeling of having been wrong about something I had been certain about, of having trusted judgment, my own and someone else's, that had not deserved that trust. That specific feeling, the cold clarity of having been wrong, is something I have learned to treat as the most valuable signal available. Not something to be avoided, not something to be medicated or rationalized away. A signal, precise and useful, telling you exactly where your thinking needs to improve. I spent 3 days in that apartment. I did not call anyone. I did not seek comfort. I did something that the mentor had once suggested and that I had not fully understood at the time. I conducted a post-mortem, not an emotional one, a clinical one. I wrote down every decision I had made from the beginning of that business to its end, every assumption, every piece of information I had acted on, every warning sign I had observed and dismissed, and I asked myself at each point, what would a wiser version of me have done differently? It took 2 full days. When I was finished, I had a document that was more valuable than any business school curriculum. It was a precise map of my own blind spots. Here's what the postmortem revealed. The first blind spot was what I now call relationship due diligence. I had evaluated my partner's skills, his network, his track record of results. I had not evaluated his values, his relationship with risk, his definition of success, his behavior under pressure. These are the things that determine whether a partnership will hold when things get difficult. And things always get difficult. Skills can be hired, values cannot be installed. Every significant partnership I have entered since that failure has begun with a long, honest conversation about values, about what we are each willing to lose, about what we are each unwilling to compromise. These conversations are uncomfortable. Most people avoid them. I never avoid them now. The second blind spot was what I call the momentum trap. When a business is working, when the numbers are good and the energy is high and every morning feels like confirmation that you were right, it becomes psychologically very difficult to examine it critically. The momentum feels like evidence. It is not. Momentum is what happens before a cliff. The feeling of speed is identical whether you are on a road or in the air. I have learned to be most rigorous in my examination of a business precisely when it is performing well, because that is when the warning signs are easiest to dismiss and most dangerous to ignore. The third blind spot was the absence of what the mentor had called mapped downside. He had told me, before you risk anything significant, map the downside completely. Ask yourself what exactly happens if everything goes wrong. Can you survive it? Can you rebuild from it? I had asked those questions, but I had answered them optimistically. I had told myself, if this fails, I lose my savings. I start again. It will be hard but survivable. What I had not mapped was the psychological cost, the loss of confidence, the damage to my sense of judgment, the specific grief of watching something you built, something you believed in, simply stop existing. Those costs are real, and they are worth mapping, not to be deterred, but to be prepared. I want to tell you something about failure that took me years to understand fully. Failure is not the opposite of success. Failure is the curriculum. Every person I've ever met who built genuine, lasting wealth, not luck, not inheritance, not a single windfall, had failed. Significantly, more than once. Not because failure is necessary in some romantic motivational sense, but because failure is the only experience that forces you to examine your assumptions at the level of depth required to actually change them. Reading about blind spots does not eliminate them. Being told about them does not eliminate them. Only experiencing their consequences, directly, painfully, personally, creates the kind of visceral understanding that actually changes behavior. My mentor had lost 2 fortunes before building his third. I had dismissed that as context when he told me as background. After the autumn of 1990, I understood it as the point. The losses were not obstacles on the way to his success. They were the education that made his success possible. I rebuilt, slowly, carefully, with a precision and a humility I had not possessed before. And in the next episode, I will tell you about the first investment that actually worked. Not a business this time. Something different, something I had been studying since the age of 19 but had not yet acted on. It was a small decision, the returns were modest, but the principle it demonstrated, I have applied hundreds of times since. I am Victor Vale, and I will see you in episode 7.